Good afternoon. Order the City of Ocean Shores Planning Commission meeting. It is Tuesday, February 8th, 2023. The time is 2 p.m. and we are located in the Ocean Shores Library. Continue on, I would like to ask people speaking to speak a little louder and a little clearer because there are people either out there on Zoom or online or who go back and listen to the recordings afterwards and are having some difficulty hearing everybody. So apparently it's easier for the people closer. So just speak a little slower and a little clearer, and I am probably the worst offender, so I will try to do better. Before we start, and I'm gonna ask my buddy here to answer that. Terry told me that she wasn't feeling well. That's considered an excused absence, right? We don't have to vote to excuse it. We'll do it. We've done it in the past. Okay, all right, so we'll do the roll call and then do a vote to excuse the absence, correct? Good, no procedural help. All right. Roll call, Commissioner Bricker. Here. Commissioner Ward. Here. Commissioner Schultz. Here. Commissioner Bachman. Here. Commissioner Lawless. Here. As I stated, Commissioner Barr sent me a note saying she wasn't feeling well, and it's not COVID. She assured me of that, just under the weather. So do we have a motion to excuse Commissioner Barr? So moved. Second? Seconded by Commissioner Lawless. All in favor? So we have an approved absence for Commissioner Barr. All righty. Do we have a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Second? Okay, so that would be Bricker and Lawless. All in favor? All right, it's unanimous. All righty. We have the minutes from the previous meeting on February 14th, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as published? Motion by Mark, seconded. Seconded by Paul. In favor? Unanimous. Very well. At this point, open it for public comment. First in the room, any public comment? No general public comment in the room. Anyone via Zoom or online have public comment?
I do, Gary.
I had Vida.
It's Vita, remember?
Wow. I know it.
I have some prepared comments that I'd like to read, if I may. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. During a recent conditional use permit public hearing before the hearings examiner, a non-party participant observed the subject project design did not comply with Ocean Shores Municipal Code Chapter 1656.0.0 letter D, and that is a paragraph in the short subdivision code for those of you that are not familiar. And that says that a dead-end corridor must have a turning radius of at least 30 feet. So this was a project that was a fourplex, if you will, that was configured in a U shape, which the design of which created this dead end turnaround. So the subject project design provided a dead end turnaround of only 15-foot radius, half of which what the code requires. Subsequently, during that meeting, there was a discussion about the need for a variance from this code and whether the fire marshal would approve such a request. It should not matter to the code official whether tenants or property owners occupy the units. And that was the topic of the discussion, that it was okay if it was just a rental, but it was not okay if those units were then subdivided into individual property owners. So it should not matter to the code official whether tenants or owners occupy the units. The requirement is there to save lives. a decision to deviate from the safety standard in this case, in my opinion, is also discriminatory because it values owners over renters. Building and fire codes exist to protect the public. Please do not allow the city to approve any code variance that sacrifices public safety for a project's feasibility and bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Vita. And I got it right.
You're welcome.
Tom Williams, do you have any comment?
Nothing here, thank you.
Ann Reese, any comment?
No, thank you.
All righty, so no comment, we will move on to new business. First new business is the transient lodging code, and I will lead this. If you go to page 5 of the agenda packet, it has been brought to my attention that we continue to have a problem with illegal transient lodging, basically transient lodging in the residential zones. The suggestion has been made that in addition to the draft provisions, which are the following 3 pages that we did last summer that have yet to be incorporated into code, that we would add the words as shown above. The words are, no person shall occupy, use, offer, lease, nor offer, and add the words advertise or solicit in any manner. Because one of the comments from law enforcement is they can advertise, but unless we catch them, it's not a violation. So the thought being is if we to our code say, in addition to operate, rent, lease, we said advertise or solicit. Any discussion on this additional wording before we look at that? Thorne, did you want to have anything?
I've always thought that it ought to be under a different part of the code instead of the zoning code, because it is a class B violation. And it designates the building or not the planning official as the enforcement. So I want you to get your pistol and bandoleros on and go out and enforce it. Okay? I'm on it. Okay.
So in addition to these words, you're saying we need to do other looking at the existing code?
Well, I think it ought to be under a different part of the code, maybe the criminal code or something like that. Just good to define what transient rental is here, but enforcement ought to be elsewhere in the code. The other thing was that, I think you asked me what the fine was for violations, rather light, it's only $100. And
There's
that's
no-
not very much money. And it doesn't, but many cities have a different variation. They have a per day violation amount too, like,
But again, I'm not sure either of those would be our remit.
no.
I think that's something we, the mayor can talk to
Yeah.
the administrator and come up with. I think our remit is to consider adding this piece of it.
Right,
And, because they have not yet incorporated it into code, I can have the discussion with the mayor about moving enforcement out of the zoning code into a more appropriate part of the code.
perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, because none of this has been incorporated in code yet, and I know why, because there's a backlog of what's going on. So there's many things that haven't made it into code that we have worked on, but this one in particular, because it hadn't been in code yet, there was a suggestion made that perhaps we add this to our recommendation. So, do I have a motion to take a vote to approve the additional language? Seconded? Second by Mark. All righty, all in favor? So it's unanimous. That was the easiest thing we've done.
That was not the proposed draft revision.
What?
That was not the proposed draft revision.
That was just the 5 additional words we want to add. The word substitute and solicit in any manner, solicit, advertise, advertise, solicit in any manner, add those to our recommendations, and I will do so. The next thing is interesting because people were getting worked up about 1102, House Bill 1102. And the other one, the 14 one, the lot splitting, and Dan actually reached out to the Department of Commerce, right? Correct. Go ahead, you want to give us a little update on what he said?
Hey, Matt, and I'll just say Matto because I'll butcher his last name. He's a senior planner with the State of Washington Department of Commerce. And he has advised the plan commission when we were doing the comp plan. He came twice and spoke to us. So I went out to him and said, do we have to follow him? And he came back and said, no. I said, okay, but now why? So I can either read it to you or just, if he said, section 110 identifies required action apply only as cities required to, or choosing to plan under RCW 3678.040. This is part of the Growth Management Act and outlines the determination of fully or partially planned status of local government. Since ocean storage is partially planning, the new statute would have no impact.
So are you familiar with us only being partially planning? I'm asking Marshall under the Growth Management Act.
Yeah, yes, that is our planning mode today is partial planning, and that which means that we just under the ecological laws, shorelines, and there's another section are the only two that are required to be updated and follow the shoreline, or excuse me, the Growth Management Act.
And when Dan sent me that from the guy from Commerce, I tried to dig into the Growth Management Act, and it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
For me to read that and find, but I think we came up with 2,500, 25,000 would be the trigger.
Yeah, the Seattle Times also had an article about this because it passed on Friday.
That's how committed.
Committee on Friday.
He's picking 1110.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so they published what's it gonna do, and part of that is that cities with population of 25,000 to 75,000 have to do this. Cities under 25,000 doesn't apply.
Yeah, they had the original threshold at 6,000. Right.
So it changed in committee. But irregardless of that fact, the fact also it says you have to be participating in the Growth Management Act. Yeah. So the word from the guy that's Department of Commerce says it doesn't really apply. So addition to this, there's, I think, and I appreciate Thorne doing this. There are additional bills out there. Lots of them. So if you want to see, you can take your time to read through it, and I will, for the good of the audience, just list a couple of the most important ones. House Bill 14.1 authorized governments to create design standards and expedited permit processes for houses, duplexes, and triplexes no longer than 1,800 square feet, which is interesting. I'm not going to do the next two because they're so in the weeds. The third one, SB 5609, instructs the Department of Commerce to calculate the amount of housing each local government needs to produce by 2033 to eliminate the housing shortage and require them to approve permits for that amount of housing. Those jurisdictions that fail to do so will become ineligible to receive from their state portion of real estate excise tax. That's an interesting one because I think our recent growth would have exceeded any sort of expected housing growth, personally. This is an interesting one. I think we're going that way. House Bill 1296, and also has a sister Senate Bill 5290, established grant programs for local governments to reduce permit review timelines and to support local governments transition from paper-based to software web-based. A little bit too late because I think we're going to be web-based for the next 4 months, but we just won't get a grant for it. We're doing that ourselves in this city. The next one's very interesting, not necessarily us, but more in the building officials area. Senate Bill 5473 sets maximum for the number of days local governments can take to approve permit application for housing constructions and requires a refund of 20% of the permit fee if deadlines are not met. The House bill is very similar. House Bill 1519 establishes new standards for permit completeness and sets a 120-day limit for permitting processing. It requires a partial refund if permit fee if deadline is not met. So a lot of work on standards for times to approve permits. Last I checked, since we've got some of the new guys, our permit approval process is gone back down. We're no longer in the 3 to 4 month time frame. I don't think. Do you know, Marshall?
I believe that to be correct.
I believe we're now no longer, I know my last one was 4 months, but I think we're a lot faster than that one. We're doing that. So looking at most of these, I don't think we'll get a waiver from any of these if they happen. Very few of these will impact the planning commission directly, but they will impact the growth commission. I don't think any of these would really do. And the good news, having confirmed from multiple sources, that we probably won't be impacted to a great extent by the lot splitting bills and the duplex triplex. That being said, before we leave this, I'm going to try to get with the mayor in the next 2 weeks. I may have to fly back east, may not make it. But there is still a large desire to look at things we can do to make more affordable middle housing in this town. And we've looked at things briefly like lot splitting. We've looked at things like the minimum square footage tables and all of those things. So if when I sit down with the mayor, if he wants us to continue along those lines, then we're gonna have to put some of these more concrete. And which of those he thinks, because we basically work, which of those he thinks will have to bring the most fruition in the ability to provide affordable middle housing. And again, defining that is a hard one, but things we can do, things that we currently have in the code that may be a hindrance. And I think with Thorne's help and some of us other folks, it really, to me, it keeps falling back to those minimum square footages. And the 1,000 square foot second paragraph, you guys, we've done this enough time to be familiar with what that is. So those are sort of the things. Then it's going to be an appetite of what is an acceptable minimum square footage. So we'll kind of go to there. And after I get an update from him, we'll bring it back on the agenda. And we'll see if we want to discuss it, call it middle housing, or just consider it a formal update to the zoning requirements and code. Any further discussion on this sort of general issue before we go ahead? Phil?
I don't think House Bill 1245 is dependent on the Growth Management Act. It's covered everything.
I can, he gave me the answer to that. Okay. For House Bill 1245, Section 21, changes identified would apply in cities' urban growth area. Ocean Shores being partially planning does not have urban growth areas, so the new statute would have no impact. Good. Urban growth area? No.
That's correct.
But that's, I mean, that's the guy that would be running his opinions.
And when he's a really neat guy, and I gave Gary the contact information. If these bills change, we need to go back to him. He'll tell us exactly.
The other thing is that a number of these things on the legislature involve accessory dwelling units. There's 3 or 4 of them that are a little complicated and no reason to get into today, but there may be some changes with that. I don't know what.
That was actually brought up at city council last night. Briefly, the mayor had mentioned, that's one of the things that we already have potentially minor issues in our current code on accessory dwelling units that conflict with recently passed state law. But I think the city attorney and the city planner would sort of like to see what comes out of this next flurry of accessory dwelling unit regulations before we look at a overhaul of our very short 3 paragraphs on accessory dwelling units, right? We do know we have to go in and clean it up a little bit based on a law passed last year on who can occupy one. But there may be more stuff coming out. Very strong possibility that this will come out in the next this legislative session. So it may be sort of the mayor and the city takes the decision to do it all at once. Let's get in compliance, our code into compliance, instead of going back for repeated bites of the apple. Because I briefly looked at some of those bills and they're all over the place, throwing on the ADU bills. Minimum square footages and all this stuff, so.
And maximum.
In maximum, yeah. So, kind of like these, there's lots of competing, conflicting bills, so we'll see what comes out of all of that. Next on the agenda is landscaping code update, and Mark sent me something via email, but I didn't get it in time enough, or didn't coordinate well enough to get it on the agenda. So Mark, I'd sort of like to sort of verbally summarize where you are and sort of your research. Go ahead.
Okay, so I sent a copy to everyone unmarked, and I forgot to send you one, I'll send it to you. But I looked at landscaping, we had a discussion last time about beauties in the eye of the beholder. Dan, you said that this one had been looked at several times before. So I went and I looked at all the boards, committees and commissions, agendas and meetings to see if I could find anything. City council agendas and meetings, planning department, public works department. And I looked at items such as natural vegetation to see where I could find that. There was 167 results for that in those areas. Permeable rock, there were 18 results. Street side fencing, which we discussed, there was 0. It was not addressed at all. Fencing, there were 257 results, and landscaping standards under that, there was 198. So I went and I read through every one of those, so I could get a feel for it. And of course, definition of landscaping to modify or ornament a natural landscape by altering the plant cover. That's out of the dictionary. The last time the planning commission looked at it, as Dan had said, was February 23rd, 2021. So that is listed there. No decision or no changes were made to the current codes. I want to throw out a good job to Marshall, because what I found that I thought was the jewel in all my research was what you put together, Marshall, for the food bank.
Okay,
The standards that you said the food bank needs to follow, I thought was the jewel of everything I found. So that would be the start to look at the words that Marshall used if we wanted to change or incorporate it. It all seemed pretty consistent with all the other municipal codes and all the other references that I found. But I wanted to publicly give you a kudo.
He doesn't even remember. Do you remember what you did for the ring day?
Great work.
I just pulled it right out of the code, basically, yeah,
Okay, well.
with my summarization, but thank you.
Yeah, it's all there, and it goes a page and a half, 2 pages, and I included that in the attachment that I sent to everyone. So congratulations on that great work. And then it went into landscaping, clearing and grading, what the codes say. Fences, walls and vegetations, and we've all seen it, you know. Fences, gravel, cement. Front fencing that is now falling down, given it hasn't been done in a long time. So a lot of things came up with nuisance properties as I was going through this. You know, that we might want to look at that maybe next. Then fences, walls and vegetation. What a fence is: a structure or planting intended to reduce or obstruct visual and or physical access. But as you can see, historically, it's been a hard thing to get our hands around to standardize landscaping. And so I look forward to any further discussion on that going forward. But I think maybe based on my research, look at 8.32 of the municipal code for nuisance properties. Might be a good place to start, because whatever we decide on landscaping has to be enforceable. And oftentimes that's the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And what's that mean to one of us might not mean to another one of us. But when I looked at the nuisance codes on things, it's pretty specific and fairly enforceable. So we might get some relief there.
I mean, I'll start the discussion. I think what we've looked at, and it's still being carried by the paper, and it's on us out of the last city council, retreat of lot clearing. And it's really, through our work, has said, this goes beyond lot clearing. So it's really, the issue is, in our opinion, that we've talked, and this being started discussion, I'm gonna try to phase it into three pieces. Lot clearing isn't the bigger issue. Because of the nature of our lots, it's very difficult to leave a lot of natural vegetation and often required to take out lots of trees. Well, that's sort of two. So then it comes down into, okay, post-construction landscaping is what we started talking about at length. Under post-construction landscaping, we've talked about, do we need to do something like liens or bonding to enforce, to make sure post-construction landscaping happens? The third piece of this now becomes, what do we do when existing landscaping has become so bad that it's become a nuisance? And that's beyond the remit of what the mayor originally asked us to look at, but not, if we're gonna look at this, I'm okay with taking a look at all of that. And that sort of comes from the stockade fencing on the street at the edge of the right of way that has fallen over.
Right.
I mean, that's really one of the biggest visual eyesores we have out there right now. We got into discussions about, is wall-to-wall gravel, or is lot line to lot line gravel, lot line to lot line pavement acceptable? Get rid of the stormwater issues of impermeability. It's more sort of we made a first attempt at appearance in the new architectural standards, which I think we'll agree to. So do we want to make a run at appearance of post-construction landscaping as well? And that's sort of where the discussion is. So please, I'll open it up to anybody that has an opinion on what we should and shouldn't look at in this body. Originally, starting as clearing, getting into finding the problem with actually post-construction landscaping, and then going from there. So open to any questions. Input.
Well,
Dan.
in looking at this before, it's always gotten down to what is landscaping? And like you said, some people do wall to wall, lot line gravel. Okay. I don't like that, but that doesn't mean it's not landscaping. Put a few rocks around. So it's really hard, I think, to define telling people what they have to do. And that's what we looked at, the last time we looked at this, we said the code's good. No. Pat Ronstadt does different things out there because he's got his own little community and he wants to look good, look a certain way. Now, somebody else may go out there and say, I don't want that.
And we see all kinds of different things, gravel, then a few pieces of driftwood in the front yard, that's their landscaping, and my bride and I, we walk 3 miles a day and we see different things. And there's no really two that are the same. And so it just depends on what the homeowner decides they want to do. Now, what we do also see is those that have fallen into disrepair. And then, really nice landscaping from their perspective, and then the fence is now, totally down. So, I mean, and then how or if do we want to address that?
Are we talking about just landscaping, or are we talking about rubbish and disrepair of existing structure?
Well, I think rubbish and disrepair are handled by the nuisance and the new abatement code. I think we're more looking at, because we get into landscaping, do we start looking at them? Because fences do meet the definition of landscaping in most codes. Fences are included as a landscaping element. Do you add that to the nuisance code, which is a simple add if we decide, if your fence is falling over, the code enforcement has the ability to give you a notice, tell you to fix your fence. And, and sometimes it happens in a week around here, sometimes it happens in 3 months around here, you just never know. So I think that's where they were going, and just that one piece of landscape. The other thing I will say, the good from all of this discussion has been that while Marshall has said his initial gut feeling is that compliance is better than expected, as he's gone back and done some have the staff now go back and do some post-construction compliance inspections. There is still the opportunity or perhaps the benefit of requiring, if you are in a tree replacement situation, remember what started all this was trees, then posting some sort of bond or having the ability to enforce a lien if you don't do the tree replacement that is required by Marshall as he approves your clearing plan. Does that make sense, Marshall, what I just said?
Yeah,
I mean, as an enforcement piece or enforcing mechanism, that's one thing, and we don't have to decide that. That would be something that we would definitely bring up and take a vote on. And we could limit it to just the tree replacement part of it, Marshall, is that? Or,
yeah, I'm not sure how far into the entire process of landscaping you want to attach a bond.
Yeah.
You know, the tree replacement, I've got numbers and percentages that I can enforce by. You know, so if you don't have 10% there, I can say you don't have 10%. It's gonna be really hard for me to say you don't meet the beauty standard of your landscaping, so we're gonna, you know, re-landscape your property and keep your bond or whatever.
when you issue the clearing permit, you specifically state you must plant X number of trees, right?
If they don't identify the number of trees that they're gonna remove, then we do a pre-clearing count of the existing significant trees on the parcel. And then in our post inspection follow-up, we count the trees again, and if they don't have 10%, then we issue a replanting requirement. We try to give them a courtesy heads up if they're proposing to remove all trees initially, then we let them know you're gonna have a replanting requirement up front.
Go ahead, Mark.
Marshall, is there a time frame attached to that? So do they have 6 months to plant, or do they have a year to plant? Is there a time frame
There is
once
no,
identified?
yeah, there's no time frame identified in code. So typically what we're waiting for is for the house to have all the siding and backfill and the things that would require equipment to navigate around the house in order to finish up construction before we, you know, try to start requiring that vegetation be replaced. So it's more of a, once the house is done, you know, my thought is before the house is final, we should probably have a final landscape inspection at some point in there. And that's what we're moving towards as I work with Roy in the building department. You know, there are several things in vegetation management, in the shorelines, in wetland mitigation agreements, those kind of things that we want to make sure those things have been taken care of and finished up before we final a construction project. So that's kind of what we're working towards.
Honestly, in the past, that has not always happened. You are not, if you don't get it done, they can still get a final permit inspection. If your landscaping inspection previously, if your landscaping inspection had not been done, they can still get a final inspection, correct?
Yeah, previously they hadn't given any consideration to landscape or other things that would fall into the jurisdiction of planning before a building final approval was given.
I mean, because there is, and it is not in code, I believe, that says they have to prove they have met the landscaping requirement before they can get a final occupancy permit, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, one alternative is to make that, another alternative is to do a bond. And the third alternative really is a lien. And any discussions about the values of all of them, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I've been in construction. I think we need to stay away from the bonds and the liens. I'd like to see it tied to occupancy. And if we want to do a bond or lien, I vote for a bond over a lien, because the liens get messy. And you may never get your money anyways. People move in the house, never sell it.
Discussions on this, of those three alternatives?
I agree, I think a lien is a bad idea, so. Whatever. My biggest concern is that our building officials and code enforcement officials are pretty overworked as it is. And I don't know that we would be properly able to enforce this kind of a thing.
A requirement to have your landscaping certified before you get your building.
We can say it, but I just don't know what's gonna happen.
Marshall, what do you think?
we're gonna make the effort to make that happen. You know, Roy and I've had discussions about those types of, you know, issues that have come up in the past, and he doesn't have a problem with notifying me. And as we move to this new online permitting software, it might be one of those things that you can't even apply for a final inspection until you have your final landscape inspection approved. You know, there's conditions that will allow you to move from one portion of your permit or inspection process to the next portion. And that may be a condition that we can set. That puts it, you know, makes it a critical path item.
It's better than a bond or a lien but in many ways, it's better than a bond or a lien. I would only personally be in favor of recommending a bond or lien if we found that we were unable to. I don't want to delay occupancy because somebody can't get out there and look at their landscaping, but with your current staffing, that shouldn't be an issue.
I don't think that's gonna be a problem. What's gonna be a problem is the contractor's ability to get materials and get out there and get that work done if they haven't started on it preemptively.
So is it, and you're the expert more than me, is it unreasonable? Is there anything that would prevent any time of the year somebody from doing this planting here?
There are certain times of the year that requires heavier watering and, you know, more effort for vegetation survival than say, you know, the fall or springtime is a better time to plant in Ocean Shores from a garden standpoint. As opposed to, you know, August or September, the sand is absolutely dry and you're gonna spend time, you know, babysitting vegetation, trying to keep it watered and that kind of stuff, unless you know, adequately mulch the soil or whatever, done soil conditioning.
I'm just trying to devil's advocate, reasons why it may not be best to time. Paul, go ahead.
There are times a year when you can get materials also. Winter time, you're not gonna be able to get any kind of soil out there. You're not gonna be able to spread it for grass. You wouldn't be able to do any of that large scale landscaping this time of year.
But very few of your approved landscaping plans require them to have grass planted and growing, do they?
Yeah, the only requirements that I have currently are these, are the conifer species tree replanting. And that's something that is available pretty much anytime. But if they're planting, yeah, if they're planting in the late summer, early fall, when the conditions are really dry here in Ocean Shores, they do have to make some effort to water in order for the conifer species trees to get a root in and take hold.
I guess.
I don't think that should hinder, you know, their ability to do that. I've had people do that at all those times of year and be successful in their replanting.
You required, like, our first lot was down by the jetty. They cleared the lot. And it's just all sand, and we put our house up on it, and it took us a while to actually be able to plant any grass or control that sand. It blew all over the place. Now, we have a requirement to abate that kind of an issue. What's the requirement?
That's not part of that landscaping permit, is it?
The clearing and grading does have erosion control measures as a requirement, and that area that Paul's talking about is absolutely brutal to hold sand down there. Most areas you can throw some straw down and manage the wind-blown sand. Down in that area, you almost have to completely cover it with some sort of a mulch or something like that to get it to stabilize. And we are moving, I'm having conversations. I had conversations with a contractor today about the enforcement of those erosion control measures. You know, based on the fact that we are not necessarily clearing one lot between a couple of wooded lots anymore. We're clearing the last lot and there's neighbors on both sides, and erosion is now becoming an issue. So I'm enforcing the erosion control measures at a higher level, in that if a vegetative border, which used to be adequate, if that's not adequate today, then I'm requiring that they put silt fence in or some other more mechanical form of erosion control be put down, or mulch.
Yes, Mark.
During my research, I found 17.50.100 clearly states about the clearing and grading of what's required in the code.
It's, yeah, that's a unique environment, so. The erosion control management, the sand isn't really part of the post-construction landscaping issue. Well, it is because it's part of that grading clearing permit.
It is.
So, I mean, again, but also that's not something that is all that seasonal, is it? The problem? I'm asking you, Marshall.
It can be. I'm requiring it all times of the year now.
Okay.
Because if water's not carrying the sand out into the ditch or to the neighbor's property, the wind does. So we have those two conditions all times in the year.
And the larger issue is post-construction,
Yeah,
where, I mean, we do have lots that are very hard to get the sand under control post-construction. Do you go back and look at that as far as ground cover and
we have been in the last 3 weeks, we've processed over 200 post clearing permit follow-ups and. You know, we're finding that we've got a lot of voluntary compliance. We're not having to write a lot of letters. You know, to go back and fix things post construction. You know, a lot of times the landscaping is there. I've got several instances where there was a tree planting requirement that wasn't identified in the pre-clearing permit application and review process that they've already got the trees in. I mean, most people that are clearing their lots don't want to leave a bare lot. The ones that are glaring and the ones that are making their way to this committee are the minority. You know, most people have landscaped their lots. They've got, you know, different types of trees planted. I feel like, you know, the majority are meeting the intent of the code.
well, I mean. As far as that piece of this, we're real close, I think. I mean, what I would do is we'll probably put something on the agenda for the next meeting for a vote. On basically changing the code to make. Landscaping. Completion part of the final occupancy permit, or something like that, and then that would be it. For the mayor, and then sort of a summary report, let's say, in another review of. The lot clearing code, we have found that it is adequate. And we recommend the following possible only change. And then what that then does is give you and I the opportunity to go before city council and defend it again. So that's fine.
Yeah. There are implications down the road as our storm drain regulations evolve to the next phase.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're gonna come into this, but at least be open to that discussion that, you know, very soon we'll be looking at another storm drain regulation that's gonna apply to Ocean Shores because of where we're at population wise.
What's gonna trigger that? Self-admission of population, or will we call
No,
it?
it's gonna be census driven, or
But we just had a census.
development driven.
But didn't we exceed the threshold in the last census?
I haven't reviewed that.
Okay,
Honestly, I haven't taken a look at it to see where we're at in relation to the requirements of the code. But I suspect we're probably there based on what's happened in the last couple of years. We have a lot of growth that's occurred.
yeah, I think we're over 7,000.
Yeah. So be prepared for that discussion, I guess is my,
Oh, yeah, and I warned everybody about what all that's gonna be. In fact, it's in I carry it in my binder. The state stormwater management plan, just because.
we're currently we're currently regulating under the 2005 stormwater manual. And at some point that needs to be updated. That's, you know, probably one of those critical path items that within the next year or so, we need to, you know,
We have our own stormwater management.
we have adopted the state's 2005 stormwater management manual.
Okay,
That's our regulation locally.
and that's all we have to do again. We just have to adopt the.
Well, we have a recommendation within the comprehensive plan to adopt the most recent, and that is not the most recent by a long shot. So,
And the most recent has the things about best management practice and the 35% coverage and all that stuff, right?
yeah, there are several updates to the new plan.
I know it has, and also, if I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, has a lot more stringent construction requirements too.
Yeah, I would expect, you know, I haven't gone through the new manual. I'm just trying to pick out, because I have not been the person that does review of storm drain up until just recently on some of these commercial projects that are coming in, we had a city engineer that did the storm drain stuff. And we're working on a plan to get somebody or a mechanism to review those as they go forward, because we don't have a city engineer right now, so. I'm getting in farther than I probably had intended.
Okay. All right. So in my infinite free time, I'll go back and read the most current state.
I got one suggestion,
Go ahead.
most builders here don't landscape when they get their final inspection permit, and that final inspection tends to be concurrent with when a buyer wants to move in. Many buyers want to do their own landscaping. Is there a possibility that the city would consider a waiver or transfer of responsibility of landscaping onto a new owner?
Now we're back to what's the enforcement mechanism.
Well, yeah,
They're moved in,
they moved in, oh,
they got their final occupancy,
well, yeah.
and what do we have for an enforcement mechanism?
I don't know.
I mean, that would be my only.
If lot has no trees all on it, what do you do?
I mean, so if we have one of these, there's a couple of companies that are allowing landscaping, and I've said this many times, as sweat equity. If in the clearing permit. That's usually taken by the builder, not the eventual owner, there's a requirement to replant. Is the owner being told they have to plant these trees? That's what I don't know.
We're sending notification to the owner and the contractor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So in that case, if it's one of these deals where they're doing the landscaping as sweat equity, then they need to go buy their trees and put them in if it's a sweat equity landscaping plan.
I guess I'm not familiar with that term, but based on what you're saying, it makes sense.
I think you and I know, in fact, there's a couple builders that do that.
I think they say landscape any way you want, basically. We don't do it. It's what they tell the owners right now.
But there should be something in the clearing permit that said you had to replant trees.
I presume I haven't seen one.
We, in our follow-up, our post-clearing inspection, if there's a requirement, meaning they didn't have 10% left after the post-clearing, then we indicate on that post-clearing follow-up inspection that there's a tree planting requirement and how many trees they need to replant. And that follow-up goes to the owner, to the current owner, and the contractor of record.
What about if it's already been turned over from the contractor to the current owner?
I'm prepared to write some of those off.
So you wouldn't have just the owner do it?
The new owner,
Yeah.
I guess I don't have a solid answer for that. I guess at this point, I'm prepared to write those off as a loss. In that we don't have the person that issued the permit or that took the permit out. As the owner or the contractor who may not have bid those into the project. And that's the discussion I'm having with contractors today is you need to start bidding these things in or having agreements to figure out, because I will be enforcing these going forward. Some of these and the ones I'm talking about, we're going to write them off. They're over 2 years old or a year and a half old that we're going back on. And I don't know how many times they've changed ownership. But if there was never an agreement between the owner and the contractor, whose responsibility it was going to be. I don't have problems with the builders, the local builders. It's the lot clearing, owner builder. The guy had some guy come in from out of town, clear the lot. And that guy's no longer in town, trying to get enforcement on those type of things is almost impossible. The amount of effort that it would take to chase these people down, doesn't pencil out. So I think that number is going to be very small. I mean, very small.
All right. Well, I just wanted to hear the background because that's what you brought up is there are some unlandscaped homes,
Most of them.
Yeah.
most of the new builds.
Most of them, yeah. Is dune grass sufficient landscaping?
Just something that would, well, if they have a tree planting requirement, then You know, I mean, those typically, those type of lots, the like what Paul was talking about earlier. Down in the south end of Ocean Shores, dune grass is one of the very few things that'll even grow in that ground down there. And so that's what some of those people are left with. If you're not gonna make the effort to irrigate, and bring in soils and that kind of stuff.
That is
So,
permitted though.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, that would be a ground cover, native ground cover.
But yeah, because there's many lots on the south and west side of town that have no significant trees, or 10% is 0.1 trees. I mean.
Yeah, no, you're right. There are several lots down there where the significant tree count on the pre-inspection is 0.
Or less than 10.
Right, the
Well-
significant vegetation at the south end of Ocean Shores is wax myrtle, and usually they're a bush about 3 or 4 feet high and. You know, they're not very big. Some evergreen huckleberry, that kind of stuff, but
So this is more inland a little bit.
more inland and north, yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion about this? So I'm hoping if I have time. To, at first bite, I'll try to get with the mayor and say, here's where we're at. We're really looking at just linking it to the final occupancy, the tree cutting portion only, because remember, that's what drove most of this, was excess cutting of trees. So then we'll talk about how we do be managing that to make sure the tree cutting, which is in the current code, is enforced. Then we can take another bite at nuisance if we want, fences if we want, because there is an issue out there that's gotten worse this winter, in my opinion, of fences not getting repaired that blow down on the street. We can see that. All right. Anything else on this item? The last agenda item is the shoreline management plan. And before we start, Marshall, what was sort of the intent of us looking at the shoreline management plan in your mind?
It was just to make sure that, that there wasn't some opposition to any of the changes that were being recommended at the local level. And really the only local level change that I made as a recommendation is that we get the enforcement actions. In the shoreline master program that were not clearly looping back to the zoning ordinances, which identify the offenses as a class B offense in the criminal code, Title 7 or 6 or 7, whichever is the reference back to the criminal code. We were looping around to a title that had been abandoned and replaced by the Shoreline Management Act. So we had several references to enforcement in the Shoreline Master Program that referred to Title 18, which was the old, when it was a municipal code, it was the shoreline codes of the city. Now we're going to refer to all of those actions to Title 17, which are the zoning ordinances. The other recommendation that I've made is to, and it's not necessarily a recommendation, it's a clarification that the freshwater emergent wetlands along the lakes and canals do not need to be delineated by a professional delineator, that the shoreline administrator or the city planner will delineate those wetlands to the extent that we've already imposed a 10-foot vegetative buffer in the residential areas and a 30-foot vegetative buffer in the commercial areas, or 25-foot vegetative buffer in the commercial areas to protect those wetlands. So we've got some inherent protections there already. And in most cases, if you were to apply a regular wetland buffer to those freshwater emergent wetlands, you wouldn't be able to use any of the lot without wetland delineation. So ecology knew that going into the shoreline master program drafting originally. They just didn't make it clear that the city planner would have the authorization to make that delineation. So we,
The shoreline administrator,
the shoreline administrator or the city.
and your use both in this
Yes,
case.
both in this case. So that's probably the most significant change in there. The rest of the changes that are in the proposed or the draft SMP are regulations that come over from the state Shoreline Management Act that are required to be in each of the jurisdictions shoreline master programs. So
And take me through process. We would like to do a public hearing.
we're gonna need to do a public hearing before the planning commission. And
So how would that run? People are allowed, we would basically publish the shoreline, draft shoreline master plan,
yeah,
and then public will be invited to come comment.
Comment, yeah, at that hearing,
So we basically adjourn the planning commission meeting.
Yep.
Open the public hearing. That you receive comments. And then,
we did that, a very similar process for a variance that.
yeah, we did,
that
that's
brought-
very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, so it'll be very similar to that.
Is there an expectation, then from there it'll go to city council with a similar?
I haven't
process?
got that far with the consultant at this point. I expect that, yes, they will vote to approve the draft as the new shoreline master program.
The city council has to approve that.
Yes.
You and that, yeah, okay.
And you guys will be making recommendations if you have any, based on the hearing that we have in front of the planning commission.
As a body, are you looking for? The planning commission to give you comments or recommendations outside public comment, is the real question I have.
Well, if you guys have a chance to review the draft and take a look at the red line, which is the only stuff that's in there. If you had questions or you were opposed to some of the changes that are in there, then we would want to flesh that out prior to bringing that to you in the hearing.
What if there is issues with some of the old words? A discussion about,
Then this is the time to address those.
all right, because I have a bunch of comments, but I don't know if they're appropriate for the entire planning commission. Or if it's something that just you and I should sit down and talk about before I ask the planning commission to.
Well, any recommendations would come before the planning commission anyway in draft form for discussion. So
My
whether
point
you
is.
guys want to discuss it as a group,
My point is, I have also comments, but I think it'd be better if you and I sat down and went through my comments. Cause I've read it all, and you know,
Okay.
I have a very,
yep,
an interesting view on this stuff.
sure.
And then. Based on that assessment, I can take my comments to the rest of the group. Before or after the hearing, would you see that happening?
I would see that going before the hearing,
Okay.
because if you guys are all in agreement that Gary's comments should be incorporated into the shoreline master program, then we would want to do that into the draft document before you guys see it and recommend it to the council.
So would that delay the public, we could still hold the public hearing on the draft?
They would like to hold the public hearing, I think, on the first week or second weekend or second meeting in April.
Right, what I'm saying is if we as a planning commission had comments. We would like to add, being me and then everybody else agreeing with, only because I've read it in detail and have a lot of real world familiarity with the impact of it.
Sure.
Would that impact the ability to have a public hearing? The same
I
day,
would-
before the planning commission?
Yeah, I would hope not.
Okay.
It just depends on how fast AHBL can get those comments incorporated in. And then also, the Department of Ecology would want to review for consistency with the Shoreline Management Act, you know, any of those recommendations. If the recommendations are inconsistent with the act, then the local jurisdiction, you know, is gonna run into a problem there.
And they're really not that. There's my issues, and my single biggest issue is. It's kind of a grandiose statement, and I'm telling you, this is going to come from city council. So we might as well address it now, because there are several members on city council that are worried about. Visual, what's the correct word we use? Physical and visual access to the shoreline. Fire protection and all that stuff, and we know the critical area impact on the inability to manage and maintain visual access. To the ocean shoreline. But I will tell you, this is starting to come up through several councils. And you're probably gonna get asked in city council, how do we balance that?
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I know
no,
it's not you.
No, it's been an issue since the day I stepped into the position.
And it's coming back up.
Yeah, and I just point everybody back to the document that protects those interdunal wetlands west of Ocean Shore's first row of parcels. And that's the Dunes Protection Act. If you guys want to do something with that stuff out there, you need to do something with that Dunes Protection Act.
I thought it was the critical areas that were causing the bigger issue.
Well, the critical areas reside in that Dunes Protection Act, and there's.
But you have it in this regulation as well. That's my real question. You got the appendix, which talks about what you can and can't do.
Yeah, there's a lot of what's out there don't apply to the, I guess, just so you guys understand where the shoreline master program jurisdictional lines start and stop on those particular parcels. If the wetland encroaches into a parcel or is a part of that, as a part of the mosaic of wetlands that runs north and south in the Dunes Protection Act area, then it carries the shoreline jurisdiction with it to the edge of the wetland, but the shoreline jurisdiction doesn't extend into the buffer of the wetland. So it's entirely possible that a piece of property, two properties next door, if the wetland does come onto one property, the shoreline regulations would apply to that if you were doing anything to those wetlands, and the lot next door that's only got buffer on it would not be considered part of the shoreline jurisdiction, even though they're 20 feet apart.
But it's still in a critical area buffer.
Yes, still in a critical area buffer.
And really, as we know, the reality of this whole stretch that runs, you know, Ocean Shores Boulevard, Sandone, Ocean Shores Boulevard, Sandone,
Yeah,
the interdunal wetlands, which are protected, are what are contributing to the lack of visual access and in the loss of visual access, let me say that,
right.
and the increasing perceived fire hazard by vegetative growth, either coming right up to the rear of the property or around your property, which we've seen in many cases.
Yeah,
So the real issue from me and from, you know, residents that live there, and also from 2 or 3 council members, actually, Wills is the one that's really pushing this hard right now, is what can we do to do, you know, fire clearing and, you know, you're gonna hear words like restoration, let alone maintenance of visual access in those areas.
yeah. So basically, if we're just talking about fire control, like what we did with the in front of the motels in Division 1. Then you would carry those same processes south in front of the residential properties.
Right.
And you would mitigate those wetlands that you're gonna impact, and the impact of those wetlands. Was we didn't fill the wetlands, there was no wetland fill done, and the clearing that was done by hand.
Yep.
And they did that by, you know, conversion as opposed to fill.
Right.
And so they changed it from a forested type of wetland to a shrub type wetland. And they considered it a conversion, it was a minor impact.
And so there was no other mitigative requirements.
Right.
Okay. So what they may be looking at is you and us to come forward to some sort of way forward for these property owners. I'm fine, I take care of my put that, but there are other property owners that have concerns. Fire hazard to start with is sort of a way forward for the city to work with those property owners, or en masse, the city publish something that says you can do, what was it, 50 feet? Where we did the ones behind the hotels?
Either 40 or 50 feet.
You can do that subject to these conditions.
Yeah,
And they would probably have to get a permit from you, yada, yada, all that stuff,
yeah.
right?
It would most likely require a delineation too, because not everybody has just a few pine trees in front of their house they want to cut down. Sometimes it's a pond or a lake type feature.
Yeah.
That ecology is gonna be pretty adamant that we preserve.
Right.
I mean, that's where the battle's gonna come, is between the city council and the Department of Ecology, if.
And you're,
we wanna do-
I understand you're the guy stuck in the middle, but I'm saying this is becoming an issue again.
Sure, yeah,
And there's also gonna be an ask about, you know, and as soon as I can think of 3 councilmen that are gonna read your shoreline master plan, one of the first goals is to establish physical and visual access.
yeah.
And as
So-
soon as that's said, there's flags that are gonna go right through, they're saying, wait a minute, we have no visual access anymore. Because these interdunal wetlands have grown to the point and vegetation has matured, such that nobody has visual access anymore, so why are they saying that's a goal? It's gonna come out.
Well, in most of what I'm doing now in the shorelines is freshwater lakes and canals, where I have written, you know, lots of prescriptive pruning, shoreline letters of exemption, and gone out and met with owners. You can cut a percentage of this bush out. This shrub needs to stay looking like a shrub. The sloughs and grasses can be cut down to a 2-foot horizontal plane out over the waterway. and not follow the profile of the land. I mean, I've done a ton of work this year to afford people the view that they feel like they deserve. The only area that and this is a small chunk of land, basically, 10 feet or in some cases, I had one today that I looked at that there was 20 feet of city property before you got to the 10-foot vegetated buffer. They're gonna be able to take the salal that's growing in the city property down to a 2-foot height, a level plane all the way out over, and then if there were trees or larger brush in that view area, we would allow selective pruning, not wholesale clearing,
20% is what the regulation.
is what the regulation allows for, exactly.
Yeah,
And so I know, I understand the problem. I just haven't come up with a very good solution yet. And I'm, hearing that there's gonna be a lot of pushback from the state when it comes to interfering with those interdimensional wetlands that are out there. So,
Just setting us up for what I fear may come when this has to go to council.
yeah. And the other thing is, it's not just, that land out there belongs to the community, not to the front row of lots. And there are some
Absolutely.
in this community who want to preserve every tree that has gotten to a certain size. And so your battle won't just be with the state,
Sure.
it will be all over the place.
The
because
definition of use.
Yeah, it's public land out there, not private land. There was no, assertion that those trees would not be allowed to grow. As a matter of fact, the regulation that governs that piece of land is to the contrary. We were gonna let natural vegetation flourish in that area and habitat develop. And so, and it has, and it continues. It seems like that strip of land continues to get wider and the vegetation seems to be more healthy.
I would argue, yeah, at an exponential rate,
Yeah,
because
Yep.
there was no wetland in there when this place was platted and incorporated. Virtually no interdimensional wetland, because I've seen the aerial photos, the low altitude photos, there's almost no wetland. No
Yeah.
conifers, a little bit of.
yeah, these
waxwood.
pine groves that have poked up through there are, within the last, well, I started in 1994. And there was not near the volume, I fought fire out there on these dune fires and stuff like that. We didn't have a problem having to drive around pine trees, and now we do.
There's a couple awful things in here. I'm gonna sit down with you and go through things. It talks about the fire trail and the High Dune Trail is actually in the SMP, which is shocking to me, but it is.
Yeah,
So there's some good things in there that we need to sort of talk about and highlight too.
yeah. Just for some history is the trail that's mentioned in the SMP was shot down in opposition fiercely back in the 90s or something like that. There were a lot of homeowners in the residential area that didn't want a trail in front of their house that would bring the public down into their neighborhood.
Well, now you wouldn't see them. If you live in.
Yeah, depending on where that trail's at, if you have, and the fire break, we ran into some similar discussions on the fire break, and it's gonna provide a path for the homeless people to run right to my front yard, and so that's another discussion that you
I have
guys should
one-
just be prepared.
I have 1 or 2 people a year show up in my back fence, that's it, and they're always
Yeah.
lost. They're usually with a realtor, find a
Yeah,
way
yeah.
to beach them with a dangerous Saturday.
Yeah.
They're all happy.
I'm happy to work through the process, whatever,
I understand, but I think those are the 2 things that are gonna come up.
yeah,
In my opinion, is in that particular area. Because it is wonderful, everything that's in there, if you've read it, I think the work you're doing on the wetlands to make it easier. To develop and maintain is all great, but I think that particular, and almost because they started the hotel project, I always got people saying, well,
why not me?
why not next? What can we do next?
Sure,
So I'm just saying it's gonna come.
Yep.
And so the other issue is that the interest in that fire break trail that's just gone. Because there was a rough one in there at one point.
Yeah.
There may be a renewed interest in that. The third thing is public access to the ocean shoreline. I'm gonna use to try to leverage this to get some repairs done. Because as you know, Butterclam, you can't get out 3 to 4 months a year because it's underwater. Marine View is starting to degrade. The pedestrian access.
oh, the pedestrian access, I was gonna say, there's,
No, the pedestrian accesses are all getting really, really, really bad as far as being underwater.
okay,
This is the first year Butterclam hasn't been completely flooded to the point where you can't go at all. Did you know that?
I know, don't surf that far
I understand.
north.
But if part of the goal is to allow access, Farm Plan gets a little over 100 to 150 uses every day in the winter.
Yeah,
And I see people.
it is a busy.
And I see
approach.
people cutting through the brush and all this sort of stuff, which we just shouldn't do.
Trying to get into,
Trying to get in.
dry
Yeah.
land to get out.
Yeah.
Okay,
So there's something we need to work with the mayor on, providing public access to the shoreline. Because there are people that would prefer, and Marine View is getting bad too. Beach is okay. Because that's down there further. It never
yeah,
rains.
I was out Marine View this week. It was high and dry. It
Yeah.
didn't look like there was any issues with access there.
We've had a couple of years where it's gone under, but not bad.
Okay,
But well, that's a different issue. So
okay,
So what I would propose is that you and I sit down and then if I see anything that I think needs to come to planning commission as a comment, in addition to your guys' ability to bring something up from your review, then we'll discuss that at the next planning commission meeting. Is that fair?
yeah. Have you looked at the Dunes Protection Act
No,
of the Ocean Shores Municipal Code?
no,
So that would be another good section of code for you to look for. It's in Title 19 of the Ocean Shores Municipal Code.
I'll find it. I know, I've actually looked at it once, but,
Yeah, and that's more specific to the area that we just discussed out in front of the,
yeah, and the other thing that's gonna come in, and I'll tell you right up front, is the definition of, this is really gonna be an issue for what we talked about. Maintenance of shoreline protection structure. This will become an issue.
yeah, it's already an issue. It's,
Yeah, where did 35 feet come from? Or 50%, that's gonna get asked,
yeah,
because we have many structures where 35 feet would be 10%
right.
of the structure. So I may bring that up and say we just go to 50% as maintenance.
Okay.
Not 35 feet, because I can think of 2 or 3 structures. that are-
Yeah, I've got several in failure that never had permits to begin with. Those are the ones that are more of a problem for me. If they had a permit to begin with, then I can usually finagle a maintenance permit, to do repairs. But if they bootleg the thing in the 70s or the 80s,
I'm talking about a couple legal ones
yeah,
that are, 35 feet is. 1/10 the size, because some of the permitted ones are quite long.
yeah.
The one that goes past the community club.
Oh, you're talking on the Bayside.
No, either side,
Yeah.
but that's an instance of one. The
Okay.
one that is out by the jetty, the new one that was just done, the last house.
Apartments,
Apartments, yeah.
sure,
35 feet is nothing for him to maintain that.
yeah,
So I just think there's a couple of things in the existing code I'd like to talk to you about.
okay,
Perhaps looking at, and a lot of this is telling you what's gonna come up.
right, sure, yeah,
Because on the bay side, you do have some larger permanent structures that we need to look at.
Yep.
And then, yeah, all right, anything else on this? I'm sorry, I've been monopolizing this discussion, but I actually read every page of all of it, I'll read the Dunes Protection Act, but I will get a hold of you and we'll try to get together.
okay,
I'll talk to you after we share some of the issues.
Oh, at one point, the Dune Protection Act was on our agenda to look at.
Really? In your,
Many years ago.
in your opinion, is the Dune Protection Act in conflict with any of the shoreline protection?
no, but I think it presents a greater, well, there might be some conflict in there, I don't think so, most of them promote the preservation of natural vegetation. But the Dunes Protection Act makes it extremely difficult to do what you're talking about doing out there for view and access along the beach.
Is the Dune Protection Act a codification of a state requirement? Because it's clear I can follow the federal state chain down to your shoreline master plan.
Yeah, so the codification of the Dunes Protection Act happened, I believe, when the dunes, that area of land was given by the community club to the city to operate and maintain. And part of the conditions were that you maintain it in a natural state. And then they set up all these things that you can and can't do out there when they codified it, and that's what's making it extremely difficult, except through council action, to authorize work in that area.
And and that's not a direct derivative from any state code that you're aware of.
No, not that I'm aware of.
And I believe that occurred in 72,
That codification of that,
when that property was transferred from the community club to the city.
So we self-inflicted some of this pain.
I did. I
As a city.
I was still waddling around at that time.
It may be back. And if it's on.
But yes, it is, it went back a long ways in history.
I always assumed it was some sort of national dunes protection
No, but there's a lot of state, if you look at the Shoreline Management Act and you look at basically the ocean side.
Right.
The buffers out there are 200 feet,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, but my point is, if it is all covered by. The shoreline management plan. Which is the flow down of the Shoreline Management Act, I'm trying to figure out why we've got a dune protection code. On top of it,
It might predate, the Dunes
That's what I'm
Protection
saying.
Act may predate the Shoreline Management Act. I don't know what the date of the Shoreline
so
Management.
strike from the code and we're good. Who knows? I mean, I'm all for less code any day. But we'll see. If we, and I mean, I'm not being totally facetious, if we believe the shoreline management plan. Sufficiently provides what it needs to, and makes the dunes protection code irrelevant, that's something to talk about, right?
It could be, yeah.
All right, so I'll look at it quickly and do my own research, so, all right. All righty. Anything else for the group? Need to tell who the next secretary is, did I say? Roughly?
Or was this one?
What is this one? You just did one, right? I've got it in here from my little, you know the deal, you gotta have a little handy sheet. If you can never find, bear with me 1 second, I am sorry. I'm looking to find out who the next. Hold on, give me the right here. All right, I will notify an email who the secretary is this afternoon. If that's okay.
Go to the new guy, right?
I think it's a new guy. One of the new guys. I don't know. I just want to, I will send an email to the next secretary if that's acceptable. Are there any other items for this planning commission to consider? None seen. The next meeting is March 14th, 2023 at 2 p.m. here. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Bachman, seconded by Lawson, all in favor? All right, thank you.